All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Crossroads. Big stuff happening. The United States is launching yet another military action. If Iran wasn't enough, if the operations in Ecuador weren't enough, we're now also launching something to take down the cartels all throughout all of Latin America, maybe even within the United States. Heck, maybe even Canada. We'll have to see if that happens. Alongside this, the United States is also working to push the Chinese Communist Party out of Latin America, which is actually a much bigger deal than most people even realize. And also on the topic of the CCP, they're present right here on America's streets, mobilizing protests, getting the little puppets out there holding up signs and yelling how America is evil. This includes even the anti-war protests. And guess what? Focus is finally shifting to the network of NGOs and their ties to the Chinese Communist Party, organizing all the craziness on America's streets. Now look, on this front, in terms of what's going on, the United States has now declared it is going on the offense to take down cartels. And this is part of a new coalition. This includes the United States, many countries in Latin America, and they're going to be launching military operations in the air and the ground, taking out the cartels. Let me start by showing you this. This is an announcement video on the new operation from the White House. Watch this.
On this historic day, we come together to announce a brand new military coalition to eradicate the criminal cartels plaguing our region. And you have a lot of it. One of the things when we were talking backstage, you were telling me the crime, the cartels, and we're knocking the hell out of them where we can. We're going to go heavier. You saw what we were doing with the boats coming in. The boats, there's not a lot of people coming in by boats anymore. We knocked down drugs coming in by sea. Drugs coming in through water is down 96%. We're trying to find out who the other 4% are, because I think they're the bravest people in the world. Either that or they don't watch television, right? They're either very brave or they're not watching. But we're calling this military partnership the America's Counter Cartel Coalition. And that's what you need. You have cartels. They seem to grow in this region unbelievably rapidly. It has to do with drugs largely. Earlier this week here in Miami, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, who's right here. Pete, you are fantastic, doing a great job. We're proud of you. And representatives of 17 different nations formally entered this new alliance. The heart of our agreement is a commitment to using lethal military force to destroy the sinister cartels and terrorist networks once and for all. We'll get rid of them.
Interesting times, huh? Just checking the chat real quick. Spaceman X, thank you for being here. Mark France, Lucy Park, Ashley from California, Gina Mikulik, Ziffy Kak, of course, Seymour Butts, thank you as always. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Again, we're going to be doing live Q&A throughout the chat now, so if you want to leave anything, leave it in the chat. We'll get to it. But let's jump back into what's happening right now with the cartel stuff. This is actually a really big deal. This is not just the bombing of the cartel boats. It's going to be more than that. But it seems the bombing of the cartel boats, or as the media has framed it, fishermen without fishing nets and without any kind of fishing equipment, and driving at full speed with 4 motors in the back of their speedboats, painting their boats blue so they blend in with the ocean with barrels of, maybe fish. I've never seen people store fish in drug barrels, but maybe that's what they're doing, according to the mainstream media. But regardless, the bombing of those boats now seems to be a broader model for the Trump administration as they go against these cartels. I will also say something important. The cartels actually have pretty big strongholds even within the United States. It sounds pretty shocking. They have bases in the United States. They have facilities in the United States. They have no-go zones in the United States. I've actually spoken to police officers, including in parts of California, that deal with this. What I've been told by police officers, you have some areas that are known cartel areas. If you go there, they have guys on dirt bikes with guns on their backs, rifles on their backs. They'll even drive up, question the police, saying, "What are you doing here?" They have even facilities on top of like hills and mountains. doing reconnaissance, seeing if anybody's coming up on their territory. There's actual cartel territory within the United States. And to this day, nothing has been done about it. Police are aware of it. There's nothing they've been able to do about it. Maybe the Trump administration will do something. This is a known problem. Again, until now, nothing has been done about it. What's big now, though, is the Trump administration. They're saying they're going to do something about it. They've now designated many branches of the cartels as terrorist organizations. That allows them to not only do, let's say, extrajudicial methods of handling them, but it also includes, for example, like, bombing their speedboats. It also includes a lot of surveillance. One of the big doors that, counterterrorism laws open up is warrantless surveillance, something that would be kind of unconstitutional normally, but they can actually do it. In terms of what's happening right now, a big part of this is working with allies throughout all of Latin America to actually go and take out the cartels. You can see in the, of course, videos coming out right now, it seems that many leaders of within Latin America, of course, Javier Milei in Argentina, Bukele, of course, in El Salvador. It did not appear, at least in the videos, that Mexico was involved, which is kind of strange because they're one of the more powerful countries in Latin America. They did not seem to have any kind of real surface involvement, although they, of course, did have an operation recently that took out one of the leaders of, the New Generation cartel. So we'll see where it goes with this. They are saying they're going to do something on it, though. Now, let me show you the actual objectives. This is according to the White House. It says, 1, criminal cartels and foreign terrorist organizations in the Western Hemisphere should be demolished to the fullest extent possible, consistent with applicable law. This is important because what do terrorism laws actually encompass, right? If you give material support to a terrorist organization, if you're cooperating with a terrorist organization, if you're assisting a terrorist organization in any way, you are also kind of guilty by association. Now, if the cartels are now deemed terrorist organizations, which groups are guilty by association? Anybody who understands the way that organized crime works, the drug trade works, basically this criminalizes most gangs. Most gangs in the United States, in Latin America, in Canada, they're deeply tied in with the drug trade. Drug trade, human trafficking, arms trafficking, these are kind of the main areas where they make their money. All of those would to some extent be tied in with the operations of the cartels. If you're talking about Canada, for example, it's not that well known. You have heavy cartel influence in Canada. A lot of it is being very directly done by the Chinese Communist Party. A lot of it goes through, native territory, Indian territory, of course, where they're kind of sovereign nations. A lot of the money laundering actually goes through Indian casinos, especially in Canada, but it even happens in the United States. Chinese involvement in that is huge, CCP involvement. In Canada also, you have involvement of a lot of biker gangs. Also something not very well known, but biker gangs are kind of the go-betweens for a lot of the Canadian operations. Within the United States, it's basically every single gang. Whether it's the Bloods and the Crips, whether it's MS-13, whether it's Tren de Aragua, whether it's even other groups like the Aryan Brotherhood, organizations like this, which are gangs, of course. It even includes a lot of the other ones, Latin Kings, all these things. Now, these organizations are not Tren de Aragua and MS-13 are. Most of these, for the most part, are not designated terrorist organizations, but the problem they're going to face is if they're involved in the drug trade, they're working with the cartels. If you're working with the cartel because they're now designated terrorist organizations, you could be convicted, or a lot more than that, for giving material support to a terrorist organization. The Trump administration saying they're going to do something about this is huge. This is massive. Now, on that front, in terms of what they're talking about right now, they're more talking about counter-cartel operations in Latin America. It does not seem that Canada is really involved with this. There's no real talk of domestic operations in the United States, other than, of course, the current ones we're seeing with the anti-ICE operations, because it does happen to be the case. A lot of gang activity and cartel activity does go hand in hand with, illegal aliens and migrants. That is an unfortunate reality. A lot of this, though, is focused on Latin America, which is kind of the snake's head. It's the root of a lot of these problems. And the cartels have effectively been destabilizing entire countries, corrupting entire countries, corrupting their politics, corrupting their businesses, corrupting even the culture of many of these countries. And rooting that out is going to be a big operation. Back to this, says number 2, the United States and its allies should coordinate to deprive these organizations of any control of territory and access to financing or resources necessary to conduct their campaigns of violence. This is important because if you understand the way the cartels work, they control entire regions of Latin America. For example, I know guys. Look, I'm from San Diego originally. I know guys who dated, girls from Mexico. If you go to Mexico, there are entire like towns that are controlled by the cartels. For example, if you go to some of the southern parts of Mexico, even some of the central parts of Mexico, even some of the northern parts, but especially central and southern, you're going to be dealing with entire towns that are controlled by the cartels. The cartel is the government, the cartel is the hospitals, the cartel is the food operations, the cartel is most of the business, the cartel is basically the entire economy, the cartel is the police. For example, if you're a boyfriend visiting your girlfriend there, and I know guys, I know one guy this actually happened to, the cartel will abduct you, they'll question you, and if your girl doesn't come and rescue you, they might even execute you. And that is the case in parts of Mexico. Of course, Mexico does not seem to be interested in being involved very heavily in these counter-cartel operations just yet, but it is also the case in many parts of Latin America as well. The cartels control entire regions of Latin America. They are the government in some areas, they are the local services, they are the police, and they run the entire show. To go in and root these guys out is a very big deal. It's a very big deal if these countries are going to be cooperating on it. Many governments do want to get rid of them, but they're effectively powerless because if you try, they'll kill you or kill your family or both. The United States now being involved with this is a big deal. It's a very big deal. The financing is important also because a lot of the financing ties in with the Chinese Communist Party. A lot of this, of course, the money laundering is done by the CCP for the most part. It also involves a lot of organized crime organizations, organized criminal organizations, which also do money laundering. Within the United States and Canada in particular, a lot of it goes through Indian casinos. A lot of it goes through casinos. Again, not a very well-known issue, but this is how these things work. Number 3, it says here, the United States will train and mobilize partner nations' militaries to achieve the most effective fighting force necessary to dismantle cartels and their ability to export violence and pursue influence through organized intimidation. Again, one of the big problems that Latin American countries face when dealing with the cartels are so powerful. In some areas, they control the police, they control the courts, they control the local governments. Sometimes they even control the big governments. Like that was again the case in Venezuela, for example, where the government and military were actually part of the cartel of the Suns. In other areas, you have it where if you try to go after the cartels and you're running a political campaign, they will kill you. Even in Mexico, for example, there's been many cases, even recently, of local politicians running for office and they're going to go after the cartels and they get assassinated. Very common problem, and because of this, the intimidation makes it so the cartels are effectively protected through intimidation. That applies also to police, that applies to military trying to deal with the cartels. They face a lot of threats. That's why they have to cover their faces when they do these things. The United States now working with them to counter this is a very big deal. It also says in number 4, the United States and its allies should keep external threats at bay, including malign foreign influences from outside the Western Hemisphere. What are they talking about here? Part of this is the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP is the real kingpin. The Chinese Communist Party is the real kingpin of the cartels. They're the ones running the show. I'll give you all a bit of a background on how this whole thing works, okay? Mao Zedong, working with Fidel Castro in Cuba, established the cartel networks. This was a Chinese Communist Party operation. The main formation of the cartels, the boots on the ground operations, a lot of it was done through Cuban intelligence operations. Cuba is not a militarily powerful country, but they're very powerful in terms of subversion and espionage. A lot of this was done through agents of the Cuban communist regime. The money laundering, the main support branches, the kind of business support, the political backing, that's the Chinese Communist Party. Russia's involved to an extent on the business front as well, but not so much as far as I know with the cartel operations. Iran is also heavily involved, especially when it comes to Hezbollah. Hezbollah is involved with a lot of training with the cartels. They do tunnel building training. They do, of course, IED, improvised explosive device operation training. They even do a lot of the smuggling networks. Very useful for a terrorist organization because you have smuggling networks. You can transport drugs. You can transport bombs. You can smuggle humans. You can smuggle terrorists. These things go hand in hand. A lot of the training of the cartels also has gone through the Chinese Communist Party. A lot of them are Maoist trained, meaning they were trained in China. This includes mainly the cartels you find further into Central and South America. It's why you call them narco-terrorist organizations. FARC was like that. Shining Path was like that. A lot of the narco-terrorists are China trained. When they talk about going after the external threats, including malign foreign influences, they're talking about Iran, they're talking about China, heavily right here. Very big deals. As we speak currently, the Chinese Communist Party provides the precursor chemicals for a lot of the drugs, including methamphetamine. They supply the synthetic drugs, including fentanyl, including carfentanil, including all that stuff. They also do the money laundering, and they're involved with a lot of the political corruption. A lot of the political corruption also ties in heavily with the CCP. Getting rid of this is a big deal. Drugs are not just a business. Drugs are not just, in fact, I'd say, except for the retards on the ground, okay? Like the stupid boots on the ground cartel guys, it's not about money. For those guys, it's about money. The bigger picture of the cartels is this. It is weaponized corruption. The cartels are weaponized corruption. The drug trade is about weaponized corruption. It's about what you call culture warfare, where you're corrupting countries. You're corrupting the youth, you're making them corrupt, and you're weaponizing the corruption. Let me explain. If a country is controlled by corruption, meaning you can't get into politics without being corrupt, you can't be a police officer without being corrupt, you can't get into business without being corrupt, whoever controls the corruption controls the country. Whoever controls the corruption controls the politics. Whoever controls the corruption controls the businesses. Whoever controls the corruption controls the diplomacy and the gangs and the strong arms. Whoever controls the corruption controls the country. Drugs control these countries. Corruption controls these countries. Who controls the corruption? It's the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party controls the corruption. This is classic Machiavellianism. Classic Machiavellian tactics. That's what's happening right now. That's what's happening right now. Yeah, Seymour in the chat, you're saying, Josh, you mean like the U.S.? They're trying to do it here. It is pretty bad in the United States also. Corruption has become a big problem. This is not talked about often, but you have a lot of cartel corruption in the United States. Remember, cartel corruption is not just direct cartel corruption. A lot of it's gang corruption, mafia corruption. The cartels, the mafia organizations, foreign influence, including CCP subversion, all of this is intertwined. You can't view these things as separate. They're actually interconnected, which is a big problem when people try to deal with these things, right? It's a big problem. We try to understand the problems we face. We tend to look at things in a kind of isolated way. We look at the cartels as a standalone problem. We look at MS-13 as a standalone problem. We look at Chinese subversion as a standalone problem. They're actually all interconnected. They're all interconnected. They work together. They're part of the same overarching operations. And unfortunately, to this day, the way a lot of this has been handled is when they try to deal with problems, they deal with it in an isolated way. Never is like a holistic method of actually dealing with the big picture problems. That's why this matters so much. And to your point, Seymour, also, the way the CCP would look at Latin America and the way they look at corruption and weaponized corruption is two-tiered, okay? First off, the Chinese Communist Party understands that what took down the last dynasty of China was the Opium Wars. They viewed that as a tool they can use to take down the United States. Mao Zedong modeled the drug war after the Opium War. Anybody who wants to read about this, there's a book called Red Cocaine by Joseph Douglas. I do recommend reading it. You're going to have a hard time finding a print copy, but you can find PDFs online. Red Cocaine by Joseph Douglas. If you want to know the history on it, read that book. In terms of weaponized corruption, there's also another way to look at it. They don't view the culture of the United States as being that different from Latin America. Again, if you understand the colonization of the Americas, European colonization, the United States was heavily colonized by, again, the UK, France, Spain, of course, doing the western states. You had the same thing in Latin America. Canada was mostly a French colony, later again conquered by the British. Kind of went back to the British later. They were French and then British rule. Most of the United States was a war between France, again, Britain, and of course Spain. The wars between those countries were the wars of the Americas. The Indian War was mainly the French War, the French-British wars. In Latin America, you're dealing a lot more with, for example, Portuguese. You're dealing a lot more with Spanish. You're dealing a lot more with like other countries involved there. Later on, Germany, for some reason. How did that happen? You tell me. Look at Argentina. And so, of course, when you deal with this, what you're dealing with is this same kind of European integration within native cultures, and then, of course, the slave trade, which brought a lot of black people into these countries too. The slave trade in Latin America was much larger than the United States. About 98% of slaves went to Latin America. Not very well known, but most of the slave trade was to Latin America. The same race mixing you have in these countries, the same mixed cultural heritage you have in these countries is kind of the same as the United States. The main difference culturally between the United States and most of Latin America is we're much more British and German influence, except for the Western states, which were more Spanish. We're more British and German influenced. New York was, Netherlands, for example. You deal with this. And also, we're much more influenced by Protestantism rather than Catholicism. A lot of Latin America is more Catholic. The United States is more Protestant. And culturally, that's kind of the only difference. We're the same race mixing. We're the same kind of cultural heritage. We're the same kind of history of colonialism and Indian wars and all that stuff. And, we have very similar cultures in many ways. In terms of their operations to use corruption, what they think is that what worked for Latin America will work for the United States. And a lot of the CCP thinking on this is if they could corrupt Latin America and control Latin America through corruption, they can do the same thing in the United States. All they need to do is bring gangs here. They need to bring crime here. They need to do that. If they can integrate crime and gangs within the system, if they can control that, they control the system. Gangs, drugs, all of this stuff are part of a political ploy. It's a political operation masquerading as a criminal operation. And this is never talked about normally, but this is the real picture of what's happening with the drug trade. This is why it matters so much. This is why gangs matter so much. It's not just about a bunch of punk kids robbing people in, Times Square. It's about weaponizing corruption. This is weaponized corruption. On that front also, alongside this, the United States is also working to push the Chinese Communist Party out of Latin America. And this is a big deal also because, again, the CCP is the kingpin. The Chinese Communist Party is the kingpin. Let me show you this, AP. It says the Trump administration in recent weeks has taken forceful steps in one Latin American country after another aimed at curbing the influence and economic dominance of China. The CCP has effectively controlled Latin America. Now it says as part of his quest to restore U.S. preeminence in the Western Hemisphere, the president is hosting Latin American leaders at his golf resort near Miami this week for a summit dubbed the Shield of Americas. Again, what I just talked about with the counter-cartel operations. It notes that supporters of the White House pivot say it is necessary to push back against what they see as China's malign influence on the U.S. doorstep, warning that it could help tip the world order in Beijing's favor. Now, the CCP operation for this, the actual tangible military operation they would have with using control of Latin America to control the United States, control Canada too. I will note something that has been forgotten, but it's a very big deal. In the late 90s, the Canadian Intelligence Service, CSIS, which is like their equivalent of the CIA, the Canadian equivalent of the CIA published a report called Sidewinder. This is forgotten history. This was it's kind of been wiped from the internet, but you can still find it. The Canadian Intelligence Service released a report called Sidewinder, and I believe it was the late 90s, where they said the Canadian government was being controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. I'm serious. They said the Chinese Communist Party was infiltrating the Canadian government. The report on this was called Sidewinder. This was a public report. This is not secret. It's not a rumor. It's not conspiracy. This is from their equivalent of the CIA. Now, they were attacked for this. The head of the Canadian Intelligence Service was even directly attacked by it. It was called racist. How dare you attack the Chinese ties or heritage of many Canadian leaders? But they said the government of Canada was being controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. They were infiltrating it and trying to control it. You can still find that report. Same thing with Latin America. A lot of the countries are controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, I'll explain how they did it, and then I'll explain why they do it, okay? So the way they did it in Latin America, the United States, until really the Carter administration, used to really enforce a lot of our operations to push against the CCP. The Carter administration was what ended the policy where we recognized Taiwan as the official government of China. They were the government in exile. The CCP was the bad guy, right? The Carter administration was when we handed off the Panama Canal and allowed the Chinese Communist Party to take it over. The Carter administration was when we pulled back from a lot of our international influence and we allowed the CCP to step in and basically take over. That was the Carter administration. Now, during that time also, you had a lot of influence taking place within Latin America. The Chinese Communist Party worked together with Fidel Castro to establish a lot of the drug operations a little earlier than that, but continued. They were working with, again, Cuba to establish, work together with Fidel Castro, of course, to run different operations, and there were a few different tiers to it. The takeover of far-left governments in the late 90s and early 2000s was part of a program between Fidel Castro, the CCP, of course, by extension, and Lula in Brazil. They established what's called the Foro ao Sao Paulo to facilitate the far-left takeover. Part of the Foro ao Sao Paulo was Shining Path and FARC, terrorist organizations, narco-terrorists. At the same time, you had Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, who also worked with Fidel Castro, the CCP involved also, and they created several intergovernmental organizations throughout Latin America to push out the United States, to get rid of the Monroe Doctrine, and to bring in the Chinese Communist Party, Russia, and Iran. That was an operation between especially Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez. That legacy was continued by Maduro. Maduro was handpicked by Fidel Castro and Chavez. On this front, anybody who wants a video on this history, I did one. It's a special feature on Epoch TV. If you want to watch the entire history of that, I have that on Epoch TV. It's all forgotten history, right? And so what they did was they pushed out the United States. They said they want to get the gringos out of Latin America, And then they signed hundreds upon hundreds, just in Venezuela, business deals with the CCP. They brought in CCP business. They brought in CCP economic deals. They brought in CCP debt traps, which allowed the Chinese Communist Party to gain control over different natural resources. They allowed the CCP to take over the politics, the business, the investment, and the crime. And the Chinese Communist Party came to dominate the entire region. That was again done between different intergovernmental organizations, but Fidel Castro was kind of the jump part. Cuban intelligence services basically worked to carry out these operations, infiltrating militaries, infiltrating politics, working as agents of this goal. That's why in Brazil, anybody who knows Brazilian politics, this is not talked about in the United States, but in Brazil, one of the big political arguments has been that the Cuban intelligence services, control the military. They control the politics. That's why a lot of the political leaders and even the military leaders in Brazil are Cuban. It's because Cuban intelligence services are they're the boots on the ground doing it. Same thing in Venezuela. It's why, again, when Maduro, technically lost their elections and was deemed the unofficial winner of the elections, and why America just captured him and took him to stand trial in New York. The big argument locally, but not what we talk about here, but locally in Venezuela, was that Cuba was basically controlling Venezuela. Cuban intelligence services are the ones doing this, but they're working with the Chinese Communist Party to do it. That's the big picture with this. Now, in terms of the actual tangible operation, why does the CCP do this? This is a strategy from Mao Zedong, former leader of the CCP. It's the method that he used to take over China. The actual statement they had was this: surround the city with the countryside. That's the strategy. Surround the city with the countryside. What does that mean? The cities were too powerful to take through direct combat. So what they did is they cut off the cities by taking over the countryside. They controlled the farms, they controlled the peasantry, they controlled the local communities, they controlled the lifeblood that supported the cities. The CCP is doing the same thing with the United States. In their eyes, the United States is the city, Canada is the countryside. In their eyes, the United States is the city, Mexico is the countryside, Venezuela is the countryside, Brazil is the countryside, all of Latin America is the countryside. Surround the city with the countryside. Take over the countryside, cut off the city, and it will die. That is the understanding. Or become weaker, at least weak enough where eventually it could be taken over. That's the method they used to take over China. And the CCP was replicating that with its operations to take over the United States. That's also part of what they call the multipolar world order. You don't have to overthrow the United States as the world leader. You just have to create an alternative system of global governance that recognizes the United States as not being the world leader, replacing what they call the unipolar world order, the order under America, with the multipolar world order, meaning everybody has a seat at the table, and America has no more voice at the seat of global politics than Canada or Mexico or Brazil or Uganda, right? Which is what the United Nations has been pushing, which is what the Chinese Communist Party has been pushing, which is what Russia has been pushing, which is what many even European leaders have been pushing, which is what a lot of far-left governments have been pushing, which is what most of Latin America has been pushing, which is what most of Africa has been pushing, the multipolar world order. Surround the city with the countrysides. That's the strategy. Does this make sense now? Back to this article, though, in terms of what they're doing. It says, we're talking about, again, that they're pushing China out of Latin America. It says, others question the effectiveness of such a blunt approach when China's interests in Latin America run deep and wide. They're acknowledging it. My personal take on this, everything you're watching right now, whether it's Iran, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's the counter-drug operations, whether it's going after CCP agents, whether it's the talk of Chinese influence and the Chinese laboratories that they're busting, whether it's going after the gangs or the cartels, this all has to do with China. The CCP is the big picture. You have a lot of little foot soldiers and a lot of details. The CCP is the main boss. They're the figure. They're the snakehead. Okay, but to deal with the snakehead, you have to deal with all the proxies. This ties in with unrestricted warfare. It ties in with the big picture of how the Chinese Communist Party is waging an unconventional war against the United States. We are currently at war with the Chinese Communist Party. We are currently at war with the Chinese Communist Party. In their own words, the difference is it's not being waged through conventional warfare. It's being waged through culture warfare, business warfare. It's being waged through economic warfare, through information warfare, through psychological warfare, through legal warfare. If you look at the unrestricted warfare doctrine, they have 72 categories of warfare, and they are waging war against us through every single one of those 72 categories. We are at full-scale, total war status with the Chinese Communist Party, even including indirect military confrontation, with the exception of direct military confrontation. That is the only way we're not waging war with them right now. But we are, other than that, in complete, full-scale, total war with the Chinese Communist Party. Just nobody's going to tell you this. Nobody has the guts to tell you this. But this is the truth. And if you don't believe me, go and look it up. Go and look up the unrestricted warfare doctrine and look at these 72 categories of unrestricted warfare. Read each one and you will know. Every single one of those we're engaged in. We are engaged in conflict with the Chinese Communist Party in every single one of these 72 strategies it lays out in its unrestricted warfare doctrine. We are at war with them. Full-scale, complete, total war, with the exception of direct military combat. Now on this front also, speaking of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party is also mobilizing protests on American streets. I'll be talking more about this after a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Phillip. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. Yeah, just checking the chat. Joel Ancher 3025, you're saying in Brazil, they've been cutting down the rainforest for a long time. 15% or more gone today, where 10% of the world's oxygen comes from. Yeah, I'm aware of that. Actually, I was working on an investigation several years ago onto that. This is not well known. But actually, a lot of the timber operations, especially in the tri-border region, where you're dealing with, it's kind of like one of the hotbeds of cartel and narco-terrorist territory, but having to do also with Brazil. You actually have a lot of terrorist organizations involved with that. A lot of the timber operations tie in with narco-terrorists, they tie in with actual terrorists, and they tie in with the Chinese Communist Party. One of the things I was researching was they actually use some of the timber for smuggling also. So what they'll do is they'll cut the trees, they'll hollow them out, and they'll use timber for drug transportation, for weapons transportation, and so on. They actually will hide in terms of the way they transport it. They'll actually hide smuggled goods in hollowed out trees for the timber operations. It's actually they've captured some caches of it. Also, a lot of that actually it's not very well known either. There are some trees that are incredibly expensive. Certain types of wood found in the Amazon rainforest in that area are extremely rare and highly prized, like especially in China. And so there's a lot of they have a big problem of people poaching it. This also happens a lot in Panama. In fact, when I was in Panama researching the migrant crisis, I ran into a lot of people talking about, poachers for trees. But this also ties in with smuggling operations, it ties in with terrorist organizations, and it ties in a lot with the narco-terrorists. They finance themselves using some of this. Also, on your point too, even some of the legal timber operations, a lot of that is, again, Chinese Communist Party. And a lot of it has to do with the debt traps. So one of the ways, when the CCP goes into a country and they do the Belt and Road Initiative deals, Europe is being stupid right now. They're making deals with the CCP on the Belt and Road Initiative because they're mad about Trump's tariffs, but they're going for a country that frankly tariffs them much higher than the United States is. Canada is selling out to the CCP right now, and they're basically looking at the Belt and Road Initiative. The CCP will use kind of a little kind of the devil's method, right? What's the devil's method? The devil's method is we'll give you a little bit for free to try out, okay? The devil's method is one step at a time. The devil's method is don't go from 0 to 100. The devil's method is you go 0 to 1. You make people tell a little lie. You don't make them commit big sins. You make them commit little sins, right? You make them do small bad things. You don't say, hey, go and murder somebody. You say, hey, go and steal something. Go and do something dishonest. Go and do a little bad thing. Get a taste for it. Get a little taste for it, right? If you read Dante's Inferno, when Dante questions Lancelot and Guinevere about how they fell, they'd say it started with a kiss. It didn't start out big, it started out small. It's the way these operations work, right? If you're a drug dealer, you don't start off by selling people fentanyl. You start out by giving them a little free sample, right? It's free. This is on me. I'm your friend. This is free. Free heroin. Free fentanyl. Why do they do that? Because you get addicted. After you get addicted, then they start charging you money for it. Then they get their hooks in you. Once you get addicted, it's hard to get out of it. Same way a lot of espionage recruitment goes in blackmail operations. You don't start off by doing the big bad things. You start by doing small bad things. Same way they do business deals. What do? Yeah, salami slicing in the chat. Terry, you're spot on. It's salami slicing. The CCP calls it cabbage strategy. The same way the Russians talked about salami slicing, step by step, the CCP calls it the cabbage strategy. There's layers of it, right? You're slicing cabbage. That's what they say. Step by step, right? So when the CCP goes and makes Belt and Road Initiative deals, they'll start off with good deals. You actually might get a pretty good deal at first. Then come the bribes. They'll bring about 10% of the money just for bribery. Once they got their hooks in you for bribes, they blackmail you. Well, they control you now through corruption. Then come the bad deals. Okay, we're going to do this, but the interest rates are predatory, meaning you're going to default on the interest rates. And what happens when you default on them? The CCP, they'll build your infrastructure. Chinese businesses build the infrastructure, meaning the contracts go to Chinese businesses, meaning the money does not go to the local economy, it goes to a foreign economy. They get the jobs after it's built. The money goes to China. They also, when you default on it, when you have to pay interest, they don't necessarily ask for money. They'll ask for equivalent interest in oil, in minerals, in timber. And so your natural resources will be siphoned off, and they will get, because of interest rates, 10%, 8%, whatever, even 4% interest, equivalent in oil, in timber, in minerals, and so on. And they then start controlling your GDP. They control your GDP, they control your economy. They control your economy, they control your businesses. They control your businesses, they control lobbying to your government. They control your government, they control your country. That's how these things work. That's how it works. All right, back to this though. Speaking of the Chinese Communist Party, the communist regime is also mobilizing protests in American streets. And this is a very, very big deal because this goes back a long way. The Chinese Communist Party is mobilizing protests on the streets of the United States. Going back a bit, this included Black Lives Matter. I know that's controversial, but it's true. It's why the donation page of BLM used to redirect to the Chinese Progressive Association. Does anybody remember this? Does anybody remember that story came out? It got covered up, but this is what happened. If you went to donate to BLM, you were redirected to a Chinese front organization. That was the Chinese Progressive Association. And everyone said, well, gee, why does the donation page to Black Lives Matter happen to be the Chinese Progressive Association? And then journalists, real journalists dug into it. And you know what they told you? You know what I told you? We said the Chinese Progressive Association was tied in with the Little Red Guard during the Cultural Revolution of China. It was tied in with the Chinese Communist Party. It was tied in with the Little Red Guards of the Chinese Communist Party. It was a front operation of the CCP. New York Times came out with a fake story where they lied through their teeth, or I should say used deceptive journalism, and they claimed that the branch of the branch of the Chinese Progressive Association was tied in with the Little Red Guard was different from the one that was, again, that the Black Lives Matter donation page was redirecting to. What was the truth of that? The Chinese Progressive Association has multiple branches, and they said because I believe the donation page redirected to, it was either the San Francisco branch or the one in the Northeast, I can't remember exactly where, I think it might have been Boston. They said because it redirected to a different branch than the one that had previously been exposed to be part of Little Red Guard, it was not the same. That's like claiming that a franchise in one part is not tied to a franchise in another part. Yes, it was tied in with the Chinese Communist Party. No, it was not the exact same, franchise branch of it, but it's the same organization. They lied through their teeth, they lied to America, and they covered the whole thing up. And the story died. But that was the story. BLM was tied in with the CCP. And it ties into other ways too. A lot of it happens to be the organizations that pull the strings on a lot of these operations on American streets. I'm not saying the entire thing was a CCP operation, but the NGOs and the Chinese front groups that were tied in with it are the same ones behind a lot of other things. And finally, it's being exposed. This is the Rainbow Coalition. It's Code Pink. It's these direct communist organizations doing these operations on American streets. The Chinese Communist Party, its front groups, are mobilizing protests in the United States. Now as we speak, this includes the anti-war protests. And focus is also now shifting to a network of non-governmental organizations, NGOs with ties to the Chinese Communist Party, getting international money and getting money from billionaires in China. Let me show you this. China in Focus, our sister media, NTD, they had a great report on this. Watch this.
While many people across the world are taking to the streets to celebrate the U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran, the Chinese regime is working against that support with paid protests. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
Celebrations are sweeping major U.S. cities this week as crowds thank President Trump for strikes that eliminated Iran's top regime leaders. But CCP propaganda is pushing back, with groups tied to the Chinese regime organizing counter-protests against the strikes. Those include the Party for Socialism and Liberation, Answer Coalition, the People's Forum, and Code Pink, recognized by Congress and the State Department as being linked to Beijing.
That the protests are not grassroots. These NGOs are financed by a millionaire who lives in Shanghai, who has very close contacts with the Chinese Communist Party.
Some are also connected to Neville Roy Singham, a Marxist businessman with ties to the CCP.
Neville Roy Singham donated over $20 million to the People's Forum through shell companies.
Yeah, wild stuff, right? Yeah, Jeremy Barker in the chat, you're saying LOL, laugh out loud. First Amendment does have its drawbacks, allowing everyone their right to state their opinions. It is a challenge, actually. So, and the CCP uses loopholes within our laws and our Constitution to do stuff like this. Now, a lot of people question, why does the CCP regard Harvard University as the Chinese Communist Party's school? Why do they send people here to study in American law schools? Why do they do this? They actually study constitutional law. The Chinese Communist Party will send its little students here to go and study at American universities. And what do they study? They study the Constitution. They study state law. They study federal law. And they go back to China and they work with the Chinese military to carry out what they call political warfare. They have a branch of the Chinese military, the PLA, that used to be called the General Political Department. They have an actual branch of their military dedicated to political warfare. What is political warfare? Which actually does work with the United Front also. A lot of the operations of the United Front, which is the way they infiltrate different countries, comes from the guys within the political warfare department of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. What do? They study our system. They study our laws. They study our loopholes. They study what is sensitive within our culture. And so what they'll do is they'll study the Constitution. They'll say, okay, First Amendment protects free speech, freedom of belief, freedom, we have freedom to mobilize on the streets and protest. They have a slogan in the CCP. The slogan is this: strangle you with your own systems. Strangle you with your own systems. Meaning, if you believe in free speech, they will use loopholes within our freedom of speech laws to for example, start newspapers in the United States that demonize us, to mobilize protests against us. The Soviets did the same thing with active measures during the anti-war protests of the 1960s. They did the same thing. The CCP does this now using these exact same methods. If you believe, for example, in freedom of, the freedom to mobilize and protest, what do? They'll fund NGOs and have them protest on America's streets. If we allow businesses with foreign influence to lobby our government, they do that. That's why you have businesses lobbying our government on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, doing it openly. If you allow the Chinese Communist Party or foreign nationals to get small business loans and start businesses in America, then Chinese agents will use that. They'll have their operatives start up businesses here, getting taxpayer-funded loans. They'll start businesses, and they'll create little hotbeds of Chinese spies on American soil. If you have laws of anchor babies, right? Anchor baby laws, where if you have a baby on American soil, that baby is an American citizen. And what do? They do birth tourism. They do surrogates. You have Chinese officials who have like 100 kids who are American citizens because they pay surrogate mothers to give birth to them. Peter Schweizer just exposed in his new book that the CCP has full-scale operations taking advantage of birthright citizenship using Saipan, an American territory near China, in order to get citizenship for what are effectively little spies of the CCP. They're giving birth to them, bringing them back to China, training them there, and those are American citizens who can vote in our elections. They've done it. They have, I believe the number they have even just there documented is 100,000. That's enough to swing. That's enough to swing the vote in swing states. They have enough little Chinese agents to swing the vote in American swing states just using surrogate operations. And again, the slogan the CCP uses for this is strangle you with your own systems. They will manipulate loopholes in your laws to undermine you, to wage war on you. And this ties in, of course, with the operations we're seeing right now, where the CCP and its surrogates and its NGOs are working to organize protests on America's streets, influencing our politics, influencing radicalization, influencing the narratives, influencing the youth. On that topic also, as you had protests like this right here in New York City, you had two guys self-radicalized by ISIS, according to the FBI now, who threw explosive devices during protests in New York City right here in front of Gracie Mansion. That's the mansion of the New York City mayor. New York Post said this: a pair of ISIS-trained extremists were charged with hurling an IED, improvised explosive device, at Gracie Mansion during a rowdy weekend protest, allegedly packing the homemade bomb with the mother of Satan, quote-unquote, a volatile explosive favored by international terrorists. It says the two pro-Muslim fanatics, Ibrahim Qayyumi, who's 19, and Amir Balat, 18, both self-radicalized in recent years and traveled to Turkey and other terror training hotspots, law enforcement sources close to the case told the Post. It says the pair admitted to cops after getting busted at the violent demonstration outside the mayor's residence on Saturday afternoon that they also watched ISIS videos and tossed the bomb at right-wing agitators because they felt the agitators insulted their religion, the sources said. This is becoming a very big deal also for Mayor Mamdani. Zohran Mamdani is, of course, Muslim. It is also true, and basically Mamdani's statement is he condemned the right-wing protesters, called them white supremacists. He was really badly attacked for that because you had a literal attempted terrorist attack. And instead of criticizing the terrorists, he's criticizing the guys who were protesting Islamic terrorism. The other side of the argument, these actually were basically anti-Muslim protests. Jake Lang, of course, he was one of the Jan 6ers. You might remember I interviewed him for my Jan 6 documentaries. Good heart. He was one of the guys in solitary confinement. He was actually punished for leaking some information to us for the documentary. I know Jake personally, but it is true also that these basically were anti-Muslim protests. Call it what you were, support it, not support it, that's your choice. But they were holding anti-Muslim protests, right? And so you had counter-protesters, and then you had actual radical Muslims show up and did attempt a terrorist attack. On that front, it's a big deal, right? It's a big deal. Where the mayor calls out the protesters for being racist, according to him, or Islamophobic, but you don't really call out, at least not immediately, actual terrorists, ISIS-trained terrorists in New York City. That's a big deal. This is turning into a pretty big scandal for him, actually. On that front also, there's a big scandal in terms of the way that a lot of the mainstream media framed this. A lot of the mainstream media, New York Times, for example, instead of saying attempted terrorist attack where two ISIS-trained individuals threw bombs at counter-protesters, they basically said that, they framed it like this was a scary, fuse device with smoke. They didn't say, attempted terrorist attack using homemade bombs. They're like, oh, scary thing with a fuse and smoke. Uh-oh. And of course, made it seem like this was just, again, like a justified or good thing if you read what they wrote. It was a really sickening article. New York Times is in a lot of hot water, at least facing criticism for their sickening article. They actually have since changed their headline to correct it, saying it was an improvised explosive device or a bomb. But it's kind of too little too late. Also, the way a lot of mainstream media framed this, they if you read just the headline, they're like bombs thrown at anti-Islam protest, making it sound, if you were just to read the headline, like the anti-Islam protesters were the ones who threw the bombs. If you read the actual article, you get the full story, but if you're just reading headlines, it makes it sound like you don't know who actually did it. This is a very common, very disingenuous, very dishonest method a lot of media use to kind of skew the real nature of a story. Where they will sometimes even make the victims look like the perpetrators. Instead of saying, for example, ISIS-trained attempted terrorists throw bombs at right-wing protesters, they say bombs thrown at right-wing protest, like that kind of stuff. A very disgusting, very dishonest form of journalism that is unfortunately very common now. But that's, of course, a big focus on this. Now, look, also on the point of these left-wing groups, these NGOs, these organizations behind the protests. On this topic also, something else is happening. A left-wing activist group has been exposed for teaching people how to infiltrate jury pools to swing trials, basically undermining the entire system of justice in the United States and doing it openly using loopholes. This is the Washington Free Beacon. Let me show you this. It says a left-wing activist group is teaching liberals in Washington, D.C. and across the United States how to increase their chances of serving as jurors on cases brought by the Trump Department of Justice so they can undermine its chances of securing convictions. Training materials reviewed by the Washington Free Beacon show. It says this: freedom trainers, whose fiscal sponsor is the George Soros-funded group Community Change, is working to make jury nullification. Briefly, by the way, George Soros has kind of a weird relationship with the CCP. He's been against them in some ways. But he also trained the Chinese Communist Party in their financial warfare operations. The CCP, in their own writings, they regard George Soros as a quote-unquote financial terrorist because he got rich by crashing the economies of several countries, including the United Kingdom a few times. He got rich by crashing economies. He crashed entire economies and he used kind of dishonest methods to do it. He's also very good in terms of understanding the nature of financial warfare and debt traps. He actually trained the CCP on its financial warfare operations. They brought him to China for that stuff. Not well-known history, right? But of course, Soros also has operations for open societies. He would view the CCP as a closed society. So he kind of has a different view of the CCP. It's a bit muddled. It's not clear whether he doesn't seem to totally support them, let's put it that way, although they've used him in different ways. But back to this point, it says this: freedom trainers, whose fiscal sponsor is the George Soros-funded Community Change, is working to make jury nullification, quote-unquote, jury nullification, the practice of voting against a conviction, even if the defendant broke the law, a go-to legal weapon for the left. It said that sessions and trainings materials reviewed by the Free Beacon show how the group teaches, quote, committed people to gum up federal prosecutions. It says the group tells attendees to keep their addresses current to ensure they receive summons. Then, during the jury selection process, it advises them to, quote, never mention jury nullification and to, quote, don't signal an agenda and, quote, and to, quote, say you'll listen to the evidence before forming conclusions. In other words, lying to the judge. If, of course, they're suggesting that the purpose of this is to lie about that. They say once selected, the group tells its trainees to vote, quote, not guilty, quote unquote, for any reason. Big deal. Very big deal. Why is that a big deal? It's because the legal system is kind of the bedrock of a political system. Not something often talked about, right? Not something often talked about. A system of justice is one of the main reasons government exists, okay? The reason we form among ourselves government is to have a system to mediate our grievances. If you were to break down the purpose of government, that's really what it is. A broad system to mediate our differences and to defend us against plunder, to defend us against those who would harm or pillage or attack or take advantage or whatever else. If you read Frederick Bastiat's book, The Law, a very short book, I do recommend you read it. If you haven't read it, please read it. It's very short, very good book. I believe written in the, late 1700s, I believe. Very good book, Frederick Bastiat's The Law. It talks about the creation of government and the nature of law. The reason we form government at the most base level is to establish a system of law. A system of law. And what does that mean? It means we have courts. It means we have police. It means we have, juries. It means we have these kinds of things in order to mediate grievances. In the past, one of the main roles of a king was to also serve as the judge. It's why King Solomon oversaw, for example, some of the court cases. That's why. It's because in ancient societies, the king was the judge. The king was the mediator. The political system was the system that mediated grievances. And the king, hopefully a wise king, would make wise determinations based on the evidence presented. Later on, of course, after the fall of kings, we created, systems of, kind of citizenry, citizen-run court systems and other things, or broader systems to establish the way that government mediates trials. Judges working as the appointed individuals to oversee these cases. Later on, juries to ensure that even if the judge is maybe corrupted, the jury would have the voice of the people to ensure that the people have a voice in terms of whether someone is innocent or guilty. Meaning, if you destroy the system, you destroy one of the bedrocks of a government. If you destroy this system whereby guilt or innocence is determined, whereby our system of mediating grievances is nullified, which is the word they use for it, nullification. You destroy the political system. You actually damage the political system on a fundamental level. What this group is doing is incredibly subversive, anti-constitutional, although you could argue they're working through loopholes, and is undermining the bedrock of why we established government in the first place. It's a terrible thing. That being the point, you also have a lot of groups that understand and understood for a long time that you can actually, by disrupting the jury system or the way that evidence is presented in a court, you can actually corrupt a system of justice. Also, there are unfortunately a lot of ways, if you have a subversive organization or group of people, you can basically incriminate anyone, you can corrupt a jury pool, you can do it. If you have a bunch of people and they're part of the same community and every one of them is the community and they get called in to serve as the jury, they can create an innocent or guilty verdict based on their own self-interest. Or jury nullification, where if one juror says not guilty and everybody else doesn't agree, it's not a unanimous thing, then the case doesn't go, the person's innocent, right? You can actually ruin a court case by doing that. Or, for example, you can create a guilty charge or a criminal charge by just getting a bunch of people part of the same organization to create that, whereby you have one person come out, for example, and they'll make a criminal accusation, then they have 10 friends who claim to be witnesses or claim to be victims, and they manufacture a fake criminal prosecution. There are groups and organizations that do these things. It's the hard reality, but it's not that wide scale. If now you have an organization training people to do similar things, that's a very big deal, because while you could argue that any system is going to have loopholes and small problems and people taking advantage of it, no legal system, no political system is ever free of loopholes. You can't do it. It's impossible. Wide-scale, organized undermining of a system represents a threat to the integrity of the entire system. And that's why this is such a big deal. That's why this is such a big deal. Now, on another topic, though, something else has been happening. First off, we have a partial government shutdown right now. Now, a lot of times Republicans are kind of, let's be honest, a little more in support of government shutdowns because a lot of us are kind of minimalist government types. I personally do believe more in like a 1776 form of, maybe a little long, maybe like post-Constitution form of government. Whereas I believed in, kind of the way the founding fathers viewed the size of government, for the most part. Not absolutely, but for the most part. I believe in a very small government. And so government shutdowns are kind of interesting because you get to see essential services running, just the basics, and all the other stuff kind of gets shut off. For a lot of Republicans and libertarians especially, this is not always a bad thing, right? But there are some systems set up where I said it's not absolute, where there is necessities to some of the organizations and branches of government that have been established since then. The bloat of government is not all good, but it's not all bad either. And, the Department of Homeland Security is one of the big ones. The Department of Homeland Security, of course, which works against terrorist organizations, hopefully, although we've seen problems with that in terms of, the way it's been used against Americans under previous administrations. There are problems with it, but we've also seen a lot of good from it. One of the good things is they actually do capture a lot of actual terrorists. They actually do go against a lot of international organizations trying to pull strings here and carry out things like subversion or drug operations or terrorist attacks and other things like this. The DHS has a very important role. And the DHS right now, the Department of Homeland Security, has gotten defunded. And as this happens, what does that mean? Americans do not have the government organization established to protect us from terrorist organizations at a time when we're facing probably more terrorist threats than we have since right after 9/11. Something big just happened. A strange communication may have just been given to give orders to activate Iranian sleeper agent cells to carry out terrorist attacks. ABC News said this. It says the U.S. has intercepted encrypted communications believed to have originated in Iran that may serve as a, quote, operational trigger for, quote, sleeper assets outside the country. It says this is according to a federal government alert sent to local law enforcement agencies. Now it says the alert, reviewed by ABC News, cites, quote, preliminary signals analysis of a transmission, quote, likely of Iranian origin, meaning it's not absolute, but they say likely, that was relayed across multiple countries shortly after the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, was killed in a U.S.-Israel attack on February 28th. It adds further, when it's possible the transmission could be intended to activate or provide instruction to predisposition sleeper assets operating outside the agitating country, the alert said. Why is this a big deal? First of all, well, look, I try to not be too partisan, but you also got to be honest. Democrats are the ones who are trying to defund ICE. ICE, of course, is tied in with, Homeland Security operations. Homeland Security, they defunded DHS. Democrats defunded the Department of Homeland Security. They've shut down the government and they've defunded DHS. Why did they do that? Because they're trying to protect illegal aliens from being deported. So Democrats, in order to protect illegal aliens, have also defunded the organization to protect us against terrorists. And they did it at a time when you have really kind of a full-scale war being carried out against Iran. It's a big deal. We are currently, as we speak, facing a more direct terrorist threat than we did when DHS was first created after the start of 9/11. This is a big deal. Now, when we talk about sleeper agents, what does that mean? Does that mean like they gave out communications and all the little lone wolf terrorists are going to get their beeper alert to carry out an attack? Probably not. What does it actually look like? If you activate sleeper agents, those are the ones who don't usually get directly involved. They're the puppeteers. They're the ones pulling the strings. They're the ones who will do things to radicalize other people. They're not going to go blow themselves up. They're going to convince some other stupid guy to go blow himself up, right? They're not the ones who are going to do it themselves. These are the ones radicalizing people. These are the ones pulling the strings. These are the ones trying to make these things happen. They're the organizers and that kind of thing. This may be terrorist attacks. It might be something else. If you understand the nature of high-level terrorism, it's not some stupid kids throwing a improvised bomb at a protest in New York, right? That's low-level terrorism. It's kind of your stupid, self-radicalized guys in the streets doing things because they think that by killing people they're going to go to heaven, right? They think human sacrifice is the key to heaven. That's what these people have been convinced. The high-level terrorists are not like that. They understand there are broader ways to kill people. Drugs, for example, killing over 100,000 Americans a year is a terrorist attack, more effective than a full-scale war. Attacks on critical infrastructure could be a terrorist attack, things that bring America to its knees. If you understand the way that, again, they're talking about active measures, they're talking about sleeper agents. What are some of the operations we know that sleeper agents have been assigned to carry out in the past? Well, let's look at what was known previously. During the Cold War, it was alleged that Soviet sleeper agents had several assignments. This was according to whistleblowers during the Cold War. There's different arguments on how true it was. During the Cold War, do you know what Soviet sleeper agents in the Washington area were assigned to do? What was the assignment to Soviet sleeper agents? Their assignments were to sabotage the electric grid and to poison the water supplies. That was the assignments to the Soviet sleeper agents. Poison our water, destroy our electric grid. That's a big deal. Do you know what happens if the grid goes down? If the electric grid goes down? If you fry it? About 90% of the country dies within a few months. That's what happens. Do you know what happens if you poison the water supply? It's hard to do. There's a lot of stuff in place to prevent that, of course. But you know, it is a concern. Well, you know, people get poisoned, obviously. You know, it's a terrible thing. That was the assignment allegedly given to Soviets. Now, is that the same assignment to Iranian sleeper agents? I have no idea. I know, for example, there's been a lot of concerns of them even wanting to blow up dams, which of course would flood areas. It would be extremely damaging, would cause a lot of problems. The high-level ones, the ones that would be activated through something like a terror, you know, activate sleeper agents alert, not radicalized people alert, which they've been doing for a long time. The sleeper agents, that's the more dangerous stuff. The big problem you have with Iran is not direct military threat. They're a regional direct military threat. Iran is a problem for Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Israel, okay? That's the reality of it. They're not a direct military threat to the United States, not for a long time. Yes, they're a nuclear threat. Their nuclear threat prowess would be about the same as Pakistan. If you want someone to actually be honest with you, this is the truth, okay? They are a more direct threat to Israel because they make a lot of, you know, big threats. The hard reality with that too is sometimes countries make threats like that because they want deals, like pallets of cash or sanctions being lifted. Sometimes countries make nuclear threats because they want business deals. It's why North Korea does it, okay? That's the real reason. It's not because Kim Jong-un wants to blow up America. Maybe he does too. But it's not really because of that. It's because they want to have business deals. They want economic deals. They want to become the center of attention, because when they're the center of attention, that's when we say, okay, time for a new START treaty, time for a deal with Iran, time to give them pallets of cash, time to open up billions of dollars, of hundreds of billions under the Biden administration in order to bail them out, time to do things that help them because they're threatening us. That's why they make threats. It's not because they're going to carry it out. It's because they want business deals. That's the hard reality a lot of people will never tell you. But they are a threat regionally in terms of military threats, but especially this is the real threat of Iran. The real threat of Iran is not military. The real threat of Iran is through proxy. It's your terrorist organizations. They get money. It's your Hamas operatives, where the families get reimbursed if they carry out attacks and kill people in Israel. It's Hezbollah networks doing trainings in Mexico with the cartels, including on IEDs and tunnel building. It's the terrorist networks that get funding or operational support through the IRGC. That's the real threat of Iran. The Hezbollah networks are an indirect military threat tied in with Iran. They're on par with a military in terms of power. Israel had a really tough time fighting them in Lebanon. These are not like Hamas fighting them in Gaza. You're dealing with a well-trained, well-armed, military tier fighting force. And the Hezbollah networks internationally and the IRGC networks tied in with cartels, narco-terrorist organizations, gangs, you know, even in New York, for example, Iranian agents were arrested for hiring or trying to hire Eastern European organized crime organizations to carry out assassinations. That's what sleeper cell activation looks like. It's that tier of things. It's a more military assassination, high-level sabotage type threat. And it's a big deal right now that the Department of Homeland Security is turned off as we're facing this threat. This is a very big deal. As we're facing one of the greatest threats we've faced since 9/11, from actual, legit, in-your-face, serious terrorism, the Department of Homeland Security is being defunded and turned off from a government shutdown because some individuals want so badly to protect illegal aliens. That's a big deal, okay? Hopefully nothing bad happens. Hopefully this whole thing just turns into a political issue. Hopefully, nothing serious happens. But it's a big deal that the safety net created for this reason at the time we need them most is currently being defunded and is turned off. Meanwhile, also, speaking of the FBI and organizations trying to investigate threats like this, the FBI, not defunded, but the FBI has expanded investigations into something important, into the investigations in Arizona related to the 2020 elections. Just the News said this. Now, briefly before I jump into this, the FBI seized documents, I believe over 200 bins of documents, or more than that, was it 2,000? From an election facility in Arizona. The documents they took have to do with the 2020 elections because Trump has stood by his stance. He believes the 2020 election was rigged. Was it? Was it not? We're going to get answers on it. This is a bad move or a good move. This is kind of like Trump just put all the cards on the table and he pushed all of his chips to the center. He says, I'm going all in. Because if he's right, it vindicates him. If he's wrong, it incriminates him. Trump just put all of his cards on the table and shoved every chip he has to the center of the table and says, I'm going all in. Because if it turns out that election fraud is real, he's right, he's vindicated, and his enemies probably go to jail. If he's wrong, it means that he was lying in the entire Mueller investigations and everything else, Jack Smith investigations and everything else, and the entire narrative around Jan 6 against him. It means it was all justified, and he might go back to jail when this is all said and done. He's going all in. And we'll have to see if it's real or not, but he's going all in. Just the News said this. It says the FBI is expanding its criminal probe into suspected election irregularities, secretly obtaining a large tranche of voting records from Arizona's largest county. With a recent grand jury subpoena, multiple people familiar with the probe told Just the News. It says the sources, who spoke only on condition of anonymity because of the secrecy of the grand jury probe, said FBI agents are receiving gigabytes of electronic election data from Maricopa County about a month after the Bureau first disclosed an investigation into election irregularities by raiding a warehouse near Atlanta and seizing ballots from the 2020 election conducted in Fulton County, Georgia's largest metropolis. Turn the time back, 2020 election night, Fulton County. They are the ones who froze the election. Trump was winning. Basically, it looked like Biden had no chance. If anybody who was watching the live broadcast that night, because I was doing election coverage, you might remember, we had it on NTD. We were watching the election. We were watching everything come in. I declared that night, basically, based on just basic math, Biden had no chance of winning. Trump was going to win based on basic math. Then Fulton County came out and they froze the elections. And then several other counties came out and froze the elections. And then ballot counting went on. Biden got a vertical spike in votes. And something that was viewed as mathematically impossible happened. Biden got about 20 million more votes than Obama, than Kamala Harris. And so you had somehow 20 million new Democrats suddenly for Biden. He got a vertical spike in votes and then won the election. Of course, Trump has stood by his stance. He believed that there was some funny business taking place. Was that the case? Well, Fulton County would be the place to go if you want answers on it. Trump has stood by his stance. He believed the whole thing was a big show, and he wants evidence. They're now raiding the place that has the evidence. We're going to get answers. Was Trump right? Was Trump wrong? Stay tuned for the next chapter of the 10-year Trump saga and the wild times that have been 2026 so far. Okay, Welcome to 2026. The ride never ends. That said, let me know in the chat what you think. Do you think 2026 is the greatest year or the worst year? Do you think the wild times are going to continue? What do you think about the raids in Maricopa County? What do you think about the operations to take down the cartels? Do you think we should focus more on domestically within the United States and less on Latin America? Or do you think Latin America is the place to go first to solve the issues here? Let me know in the chat. Also, if you haven't checked it out yet, I have a new show. The new show is the Josh Phillips Show. Joshphilipp. Everyone spells my name wrong. Everybody spells it wrong. Don't take it personally. It was even wrong on my driver's license for a bit because everybody spells it wrong. The Josh Phillips Show. Joshphilipp. That is currently on YouTube. So if you want to watch the new show, check it out on YouTube. It's a great show. Please watch it. Please give it a like. Please help spread it. And good news, we are finally monetized. I've been demonetizing Crossroads since good old January 6th because I told the truth to y'all. We started a new show. We're finally monetized. So thank you for your support. Thank you for being here all these years. Be sure to check out the new show. Give it a like. Check out the videos. Let me know what you think. And join me again on Thursday for the next episode of Crossroads, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, thank you so much for being here. And as always, please take care of yourselves. Stay informed. Stay free. Thank you.